Good evening to you and welcome to this program of Walter Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Deon Abrams, and it's good to be back with you again this week to discuss the ongoing political, economic, and social situation here in Guyana. And my guest again this week is Brother Tacuma Ogunseye. I want to welcome you to the program, Tacuma, and
well, as usual, it's always a pleasure to be here to get a chance to address our viewership and the country as a whole to discuss issues that we believe are important and generally the people out there also believe are important.
yeah, it's so. Last week we spoke a lot about the Orin Boston assassination, and we see assassination with a deliberate sense of what has been happening. But so far, the young man has been buried, and we express or continue to grieve with the wife and the children, the mother, his sisters and brothers, and so on. The people of Dartmouth. But we still have no word from the police except to defend the alleged architect of the assassination in a release that was issued to the press, denying the involvement of the person whom it is alleged sent those people to assassinate Orin Boston. But no word on the person who committed the act, nothing from the Office of Professional Responsibility, nothing in relation to the killing of Orin Boston except that defense. What kind of situation are we dealing with?
Like you, I want to again extend our sympathies to the Boston family and the Dartmouth community and the whole Essequibo coast there. We in this part of the country have had years of our own distress in as far as extrajudicial killings are concerned. And on this program last week, we made it very clear that the PPP is out to make the Boston killing another cold case. You're hearing all kinds of reasons why he was killed in the manner in which he was killed. But I am not at liberty to repeat them because I can't verify them. But I am around long enough to understand PPP's behavior on these matters. And any government that has difficulty in identifying the person who perpetuates such a heinous crime and can't name that person publicly, raise a lot of eyebrows. Because any government that is not guilty, any government that is not encouraging that behavior will quickly and swiftly identify and make public known the officer who is in question. Of course, give him his right to free investigation, and if necessary, when they come to trial, free trial. But once you see they're not calling names and they've put a cover over identifying the person, you know that they're engaged in acts of protection. That is one of they consider that person as one of their people. And I think that this is the difficulty that we will have in this matter. And I agree with the family and the mourners who attended the funeral on Friday. The major call and chant was for justice. And we in the world, toward the Groundings, has to continue, fighting for justice for Boston. And we have to call a spade a spade,
But I mean, we're talking about Boston. I see because I'm seeing a pattern evolving, because like I said last week, Boston is not the only young African businessman that was assassinated. And we had the other youngster I mentioned from Kitty, who was in the same way, in very cloudy circumstances, assassinated, and up to now nothing has come out of that. So my concern is that we have a minister who is in charge of the agency, the Guyana Police Force. So far we've heard nothing from him. How do you factor in the Minister of Home Affairs in relation to all that has transpired and his deafening silence?
Well, he did spoke already with the normal PPP line that there will be an impartial investigation and that they will revisit the standing orders, of the SWAT team, and that kind of thing. But that is a normal thing they normally do. And I don't think the minister, once the PPP has vested interest in protecting the killer, minister would act to protect that person, protect the party, and protect the government. So you can't expect from Rosenben any level of real professionalism in this matter. In these matters, once the state gets involved and hooked up, whether directly or indirectly, professionalism is thrown outside the door. It's only constant pressure could make you get some degree of justice. And in Guyana, the PPP is very clear when dealing with African community. The PPP, have made it the rallying cry that African communities must not benefit from protest action, don't care how insignificant the action is, because they see it as a stepping stone to more resistance. And despite the justice in this Boston matter, we have to dig in for a protracted struggle with this regime in order to get justice in Boston. President Ali, speaking from abroad in New York, he made the same kind of statement that he will ensure that justice will be done. Every PPP president said the same thing for Waddle. He said the same thing for Kwame Wing. And we see the outcome. But more than that, I read extracts from the president's statement, and it didn't miss me the way in which he treats the extrajudicial killings that started from 2002 onwards. In that period, he separated the PPP from it and seek to blame it on the opposition. Now, when a president takes such a posture, he becomes locked in that logic, and he can't wiggle himself out of it. There is no way Ali, as a president of Guyana, could deal with the question of the Boston killing or extrajudicial killing in general, in any principle and progressive way. He have already locked himself into the PPP mode. So I don't expect nothing positive to come from what he said, or from the government's and the police so-called investigations.
Yeah, in fact, what he actually said is Guyana has no history of extrajudicial killing, which is, preposterous. And people have gone on social media to basically debunk that claim, to highlight the number of persons who have died. I saw one person listing a number of people who were assassinated by the PPP regime of that period. And as we were saying, that we are basically revisiting that time, because it has begun, and the fact that they are taking no action when we know for a fact that these are deliberate murders taking place and being sanctioned by the police. And I don't know, I mean, in any other country, if the police force behaves in that way, then the person who is in charge of that force, the commissioner of police, the minister of home affairs, they normally are the people who have to answer questions.
Yeah, the buck fall there.
It stops at their thing. But we seem to be living in a strange kind of country with different rules when it comes to black people and murders committed by the police. I mean, you trace the history of brutality against the police, and I saw one guy, what is his name, General Hammond, commenting, saying that we don't know what we're talking about. I mean, I don't want to even...
That was dignified, the response.
Even know what he's talking about.
Because that's a man who, all he concerned with himself, only he matters.
Yeah.
When you deal with those psychopaths, you can't treat them as normal critics.
I mean,
to have any, constructive debate or discussion on anything.
Just in passing, when I first met the guy, he seemed to be progressive in his thinking, to be knowledgeable. But when I got to know him, I know that he's pretty shallow. He doesn't have much. It's one rhetoric all the time. He can't move beyond that. And he tries to fix himself in a Marxist mode, when in fact he doesn't even, understand Marxism in my sense, and is more capitalist than Marxist. Right?
When you watch watch their life and the way they live,
Yeah, definitely.
But then maybe we don't want to waste too much time.
But I mean, in other countries, calls would have been made for the heads of the minister in particular. Where are we with that?
You see, Ghana is too divided country.
Mm-hmm.
You see, Ghana is too divided country, so it's hard to get any, conservative national opinion on anything. And the deaths of ordinary people. I mean, Boston, even though he's a businessman, just ordinary Guyanese. The system don't see him and his life as worth much. And even the wider society, even though there will be general condemnation and there will general disgust, a lot of people wouldn't put their names out there to call for the resignation of the commissioner of police or the minister of home affairs. I mean, you look at it. It's a number of days. None of the biggies in the society haven't come together, and put a joint letter, calling, for these two top officers who are responsible for the police, to be answerable or any such thing, But probably was one of their kind had got shut down in that way. The private sector association, the all of the quote unquote vested interests would have already called for the heads of the commissioner and probably the minister, But that's the reality. It's a class issue, even though we don't spend a lot of time discussing the class engagement. But that is part of the reality.
Well, we did mention on this program at some time ago that there is a deliberate reason for putting Ben as Minister of Home Affairs, because we knew that the road that the PPP did walk and the road that they intend to walk again. And you have pointed out a particular dynamic in relation to struggle. When Gadraj was there, we came out and we actually got his head. He was sent to India. How difficult it is to achieve a similar outcome with a Robeson-Ben?
Well, it is hard for me to answer that with any definiteness, because we're in a pandemic situation, which doesn't offer well for normal politics. I remember that process took months and a lot of street demonstrations and a lot of energies, and a political leadership that was committed to the cause. And they only become committed to the cause when the problem becomes so large that it couldn't be ignored. Now, the Boston killings with the return of the PP to power, and the few others that you mentioned that the police have assassinated, haven't reached that point yet. And I don't know that we have enough consciousness and social energies that could easily, in this pandemic period, lead to a strong enough social response that will allow us to have the head of the minister. I'd be glad if we could reach that point, but I'm not seeing it. But in societies, the struggle does throw up sometimes some surprises and some unpredictables emerge, But given the numbness of the society on these kinds of state murders, and given the fact that the opposition constituency is still to come out of the nightmare of the APMU AFC coalition defeat and the negative effect that it had on people's spirits and so forth and so forth, it would take, we will get there, but I can't say we get there tomorrow, but we get there because people have a way of, recovering, and then the rulers have a way, consciously or unconsciously, of helping the struggle, helping the recovery, So I am certain that people will rise up at some point and put the end to this nonsense. If the people continue along the road, it seems to have chosen to walk up once more.
Well, it's really, I even saw that, that's part of their own internal conflict, but they're someone writing and accusing another police person of covering the paper shards killing that took place on Main Street. I know for a fact that the former minister, Kemraj Ramjatan, was pointing out that they spent monies to install closed-circuit television cameras all across Georgetown. And as soon as the PPP got into power, they just turned them up so that they're not focusing on the locations that they really were supposed to be focusing. And so there's a sense that the PPP has plans for, things that are nefarious, that are not in the best interest of the society, and that they are not interested in surveillance in relation to those activities that are going to take place. The importance of CCTV, and when they had mentioned it, when Jack Dio had said that the police will be implementing that into the society, Granger had made a comment that, that he didn't see the purpose for it. And they had come down upon him, saying that in this modern society all across the world, CCTV would be the thing to combat crime. And they're surprised that he was said that he was an expert on crime and was condemning the attempt to bring it. But now that it's here, they have basically switched it off, not making use of it. The importance of it, most of the things that happen now are private people's cameras that are capturing those events, and through those private replays, people are able to see what actually transpired. Whether it's an accident. Recently there was a robbery just outside Munishwaris near the East Coast Car Park. 36-year-old policeman was robbed by a knife-wielding bandit, and the capture that was captured clearly on the cameras from that Munishwaris building, and so the perpetrator is in custody. But what has happened to the nation's surveillance that was paid for and was installed and should be fed through the national system for helping to solve crime? How can a government simply not be interested in ensuring that it keeps working? What is the reason for that?
Well, it's hard to give a logical answer to that. You know, sometimes, you know, you're being forced to be less cynical. You know, the PUP got a tendency, what they put in place, or what the coalition put in place, they're stripping and refixing. You know, and they sometimes carry this thing to ridiculous levels. I mean, I really can't, you know, make an answer with any great certainty that I have a sense of the thinking, but I know that is basically the way they operate. That they broke up anything the coalition do and refix it, you know, to suit the PPP's agenda. And probably the poor cameras find themselves victim to that kind of behavior. But I mean, to be more serious though, you know, you can't deal with national security, you know, in that kind of way. You know, you have to build on what previous government administrations do, you know, and to consolidate. And where you find you could improve the system, you improve the system. But you don't just turn the system off, you know, or to reduce the capacity of the system to deliver what it was intended to deliver. But this is Guyana. I mean, dealing with the PPP. They got their own logic for these things, you know.
Yeah, well, that's the logic that I'm trying to get at.
You probably got to invite Jack Dio here from Groundings and actually the question, boy.
No, Jack Dio might tell me that the Demerara River is what? Getting an orgasm.
Come he said he's stopping the fish will get the orgasms. I guess I don't know. I hear the man is sick.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sick in his brain.
No, but I mean, if he's sick of the kind of illness I hear people call it, but people so just hate Jack Dio that when they tell you Jack Dio's sick, how he's sick with it, you gotta be you gotta take out a spoon of salt. Okay. You know, you can't be too sure. Right. But we know for a fact if people are seriously sick to death on heavy drugs, it could affect the head, you know, the brain.
So both of them sick?
Probably. I don't know. You know, and there seems to be showing this behavior very closely, close time span.
Right.
So, anyway.
You got two sick people.
I mean, sometimes it's good to get a little humor in this depressing political situation.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm concerned because we have, in neither case has the perpetrator been identified. And we have had in this country instances where, well, one ideology of the police force is that certain elements must be killed, right? That is their way of dealing with
crime.
That they can't pursue tactical police methods and strategies to bring these people to justice. So they take the law into their own hands and eliminate people in society. But then we've had the facet of the phantom and the drugs getting into the midst of everything and being part of the mix, so that there was this turf war that led to the Taliban and Phantom and so many people being dead. And there is that fear that the re-emergence of this killing squad, sanctioned by the state, is something that we should not be unwary of, right? And we don't know the motive for that particular individual who is alleged to have sent those people to assassinate Boston. We don't know we haven't heard, but I haven't been privy to the information of who sent those other persons to assassinate the other young businessman from Kitty. But if this is a trend, then it has to be stopped. You cannot go to an international forum or in the United States and face business people and go to the United Nations and make statements claiming that racism is not in your country, that extrajudicial killing is not a part of your society, and basically deny what the world is seeing. How can you justify acts that are statistically, evident by the, particularly we have a dossier of those killings, and then you want to refute it in public, right?
You see, it demonstrates two things. It demonstrates the level of political ignorance of the president, that he really believed he could bulldose the international community and public opinion, both internationally and local, on those well-established matters. I mean, for anybody who go through the history of Guyanese police force and Guyanese state, okay, we have a record number of extrajudicial killings, one of the highest ratio in the world. Given the size of the population. And we got this problem that is with us, as I said over and over in the program, since the early days of independence. So everybody know the degeneration of the Guyanese police force when it comes to extrajudicial killing. And for a president coming in 2021 and addressing the world and denying extrajudicial killings, it's just making himself look dotish, because he's not convincing anybody. And to say that Guyana doesn't have racial problems and the government is not guilty of racial behavior, who will buy that? I mean, anybody just look at the Guyanese economy, you will see the structural racial problems as reflected in the economy. And if a sitting government whose supporters are dominant in the economy is denying, that their ethnic and racial issues that are related to race, then it holds little hope that that government and that president would rise to the challenge to deal with the profound contradictions in the Guyanese society as it relates to ethnicity or race, and in terms of economic and social justice. If an economic system is so lopsided in terms of its domination by one set of people, then as a consequence of that, the social relations and the social problems, eventually take the similar pattern. If you impoverish a people, then in that people's community, we see it in the United States, the structural racism in the United States of African people and people of color make African people the lowest level in the economy. The consequences of that, they suffer from all kinds of social problems, crime, poor health, diabetes, lack of education, the schools are not the best, and a whole set of things follow. That economic malfunctioning system. And the same thing is happening to Guyana, and it will get worse. Mm-hmm. And the challenge to any government, whether this government or any other government, is to recognize that don't care what you say about wanting social cohesion and wanting racial harmony, unless the government takes it as a duty to engage and publicly acknowledge the disparity between the African community, the Indian community, the Portuguese community, and the disparity between the American community and the Indian community, and the Portuguese community, and now we got the Chinese community. Unless they recognize that and lift it, okay, to a level of government's urgency to readdress, then that government is not doing, well for the unity and the cohesion of the country.
But do we get a sense that, all right, they got away with murdering the youngster in Kitty because there was no massive outcry except for the family who went on the media and demanded justice and so on, but there was no big outcry in the city. The Boston's case was different because a lot of people, and I was pleased to see in the photographs and social media that there was, there were many Indian people from the community who attended that funeral to also show their, grievance with the Boston family and so on. And it speaks well for the fact that there is some sense of unity in the understanding that this is one of our people. He is part of our community, and he has suffered at the hand of the state. But do we get a sense that Boston resulted from the fact that he got away with murdering in Kitty, the youngster from Kitty? Are we saying that if they are allowed to just let this ride again, that let it, because they seem to believe all the time that after a while it dies, crummy wing, everybody waddle, they're going to make noise for a while and then it's going to peter out. That they are going to do it again, because no reprisals have come.
Look, the logic about oppression is that when the oppressors oppress you, they work out your capacity to resist. And we have demonstrated as an African community, we have demonstrated as a country, that when we face with extrajudicial killings in the state, whether it is this government or previous governments, we have never able to reach the point where we teach the politicians and the rulers a sufficiently important lesson that this thing could be high risk and that it is pointless to invest in it. And I think that our history have demonstrated, and the PP seems to be confident on that, on this. And today they have been reading it right, that they will kill us. A lot of police engaged in these extrajudicial killings. There would be an outcry from the African community. There will be an outcry that may cut across race. Some of the own people may join with us, and condemn it. But the history have shown we haven't been able to have a sustained collective response on these matters that is sufficiently strong enough to force the rulers to think again. So on the basis of the known and established evidence, I will argue that they will be thinking that they could write this.
And that they could do it again.
And they could do it again. But, these things is catch up with you. But until they catch up with them, it didn't catch up with them. That's the logical a reality.
So what message, as a deterrent to the likes of the author, the instigator, because we wonder, whether these are political directives given to this agent in the police force, who is...
From what I hear that may have triggered the death of Boston, it is clear to me that it was political instructions. It's clear to me. You have the chronic disease in the police force, where the police force have been allowed by subsequent governments, and particularly the PPU government post 92, to engage in extrajudicial killings that reach unprecedented levels. And we have never been able to rid the police force of those officers. And even the APM UFC coalition government haven't put significant pressure upon the police force and the police officers to know that there's a high price for that kind of behavior. Because nobody has been jailed, or nobody lied in the jail for, on these matters. No police officer, senior officer who cover up for the junior officer those kind of crimes languishing in jail. So even the APMU government, even though it had the exert its influence on the police force to suppress the behavior to some extent, or to a great extent, relative to what the PP was doing, they haven't brought to justice any police officer who has been guilty of that. Therefore, for the police as an institution, and police officers, they get, they judge the politicians, the rulers. They know the rulers depend upon them to keep order in society, and they know because of the importance, the rulers, they feel that they got some special obligation to the police to treat the police with kid gloves. And the police officers take advantage of that. And they play the politicians, just because the politicians play them for favors, they play the politicians for favors too. I do dirty work for you, you gotta do dirty work for me. So the point I'm making is that we got that systemic problem in the police force as it relates to police behavior in Guyana, extrajudicial killings. And we could treat them as a non-political directed killings. Those are killings come out of the culture of policing in Guyana. But then you have the political killings, the Kwame Wing, the Waddles and so. And I think this case, fit that bill from the information I am receiving on what is likely to trigger that. That instructions come from the political circles to the trusted elements in the police to teach you a lesson. And the teaching here lesson, of course, if you I'm being theoretical now. I'm a person.
To make him an example?
Yes, that's what I mean.
But they ain't teaching no lesson. The man is dead.
Right, in that sense, you're right. To make him an example. So I don't have to explain further. I didn't get the point right away.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. To make him an example. And if you mess with me, we mess with you. Or we mess with you in the most brutal way.
It's tragic. But I mean, I'm still worried about moving forward because I am saying that, it shouldn't happen again. And the general sense is that they are going to do it again. How do we strategize to deal with any other such eventuality? Are we going to just let it ride? Are we going to let this ride? I believe that this should be where it stops.
Yeah, but it's easier said than done. Because to get a community to act cohesively on any political issue in Guyana, is not easy. We don't have the kind of political unity and discipline, to get it. That is why these things will live with us for a long period of time. But what we could best assure, history have taught us that a point in time has come, and sometimes you unexpectedly, where people address these matters and put an end to it. They bring about social transformation and political change that make it almost impossible for you to repeat that kind of behavior. You see, I'm convinced that the nation hasn't reached a point in its political evolution that allows it to restrain state executions, regardless of who controls the state. we have demonstrated over time as a society and as a country that the actors who control the state could engage in killing of citizens' life, whether it's for political reasons or for personal reasons or whatever reasons. And we haven't put a sufficient enough restraint on them. None of them is in jail for these killings. You could go as far back as you want to go. And if that is your society, okay, as bad as America is, and the fact that they still struggle with all these problems, but they could point to American okay, officers who are in American prisons serving sentences for extrajudicial killings. I know she don't, even though it's not to the extent that you would want and to match their crisis, but at least you could point. It's hard to find in a consistent way that as a country we have been able to tame extrajudicial killings by state actors.
But you mentioned last week that people have to make people like the alleged person who is in the hierarchy of the police force, make them unwelcome in our communities because they're agents of our race who are being used to basically do the biddings of the racist administration. I don't think some people got a sense of what you mean by make them unwelcome. Would you want to elaborate a bit more on that?
Okay, you see here, history have taught people in the struggle against oppression. Mm-hmm. That's one of the worst forms of oppression is racial oppression. And when it's being reflected in a particular set of rulers of a particular race, make it a political strategy on their part to recruit persons of the opposing race to use against themselves is one of the worst forms, okay, of oppression, because it places a high price on that community to deal with the problem, okay, because you got to deal with their own oppressing them. People, if in ethnic societies, if the oppression comes straight from the other opposing group, it becomes easier for the opposite group to rally and to fight back and to push back. But when they're able to use your own people to oppress you, you experience a period of limbo, to put it in a layman term, where you're not too certain how to deal with the problem because it's your brother or it's your sister. Okay? Now, I think that what is necessary, as I argued last week, is that we have, as African community, have to accept it as our responsibility to make them unwelcome. They must be able to walk on the streets and we treat them as a police and we salute to them. And I think, if I remember the word that the wife said when Boston got shot, the last word, he said, ouch, or ouch. Now we should make that word a rallying cry. When we see police, we are ouch, ouch, ouch. Even though that police may be responsible, but you make it uncomfortable for them, so they go back in the station, okay, and they put pressure upon the officers, both at the leadership level and at the lower level, that people are offended in a profound way. So the point I'm trying to make, we have to have cultural and social forms that known killers of our people must know they're not welcome among us.
So they're still going to gathering.
Gathering and be welcome, when they walk in, we walk out. Shaking hands, and accepting they've done nothing. You see, until our repulsion of those acts don't reach that point, we will be actually creating the conditions for the continuation of it.
For them to believe it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
So that is where I think we have to go. We have to, our political, our cultural, our religious leaders and organizations has to meet and study this problem and to agree to create an environment that, you know, these elements, you know, they are welcome.
You walk in a shop, you just turn your back and don't sell them.
You know, them things, you know.
Reject them.
Reject them. You know. And we must get the names and the names of the all over the street. By now, the PPP shouldn't be able to cover the person who should boss them, because I know there are African persons in the system who know the name of the person.
And but that name is in the public. It's in the public.
No, but I'm saying organizationally, if it is in the public, why I don't know it? And I'm a political actor, and I haven't. Nobody have told me the name of the person. People have told me that they hear that he moved from close arrest to a more relaxed open arrest, you know, and so forth in the police compound and so. But nobody have said to me the name of the person.
Oh, you're talking about the actual shooter.
The actual shooter. That's the point I'm making. You see, and I'm saying he must be known in the police circles, and to the extent that he is known, people in the African community, political people and social people, must know the name. But the point I'm making, we don't have a network and a culture that when we get these things, we use it as a weapon against them. That we make it known throughout the world, every community.
The face must
the face at the pump, and we blow up the face, and then they're all over the community as the killer. Until we reach that point, you know, we will be encouraging our own oppression and liquidation by this regime. It is only when we reach that point that both those black people who want to play the dirty role for the PPP and the PPP themselves would recognize, you know, that we are playing games. But to the extent that we will keep responding to it the way we have been responding for the decades, then, you know, business as usual.
I mean, the experience in South Africa should teach us a lesson.
You know,
in Sarafina, there was one policeman who actually was an agent of the state, and they dealt with him condignly. I saw also in Jamaica, the harder they come, with Jimmy Cliff, and there was another rogue officer there also who, I mean, actually ran out of the community with speed. So, I mean, we got to run them out. We got to run them out.
Yeah, but they must not be welcome. They must know that they will not be welcome, you know.
Because we cannot have them continuing this whole murdering of our youngsters simply because the political directorate wants it to happen. So we continue to make the call for the police to release the name of the individual.
Not only the police, the government too.
The government, all right, because they have not.
Yeah, they said the file gone to the the director of public DPP. Okay, so they must know who they're investigating.
Definitely,
it's time we know who they're investigating. If I even commit a crime, my name was there right from day one. They were there parading around the place. Ogunseye is the criminal man, and I don't feel, you know, that I am being treated equally as a citizen when a police could engage in such a heinous crime and he get protection by the state and his name is not being revealed. And if I just thief a cigarette, my name gonna be revealed.
I might even be dead. That's fine. So, murder is being upheld and sanctioned by the state once more. And as I'm saying, the buck stops here. We must not let it get past this Orin Boston. The second, within a short space of time, within 2-3 months. And if it continues, we can expect that maybe in the next 2 months another person will be killed, assassinated by the police. So the struggle continues, right? And we have to find ways, like you said, you've suggested some ways, but we have to find ways of making it stop. You know, come hell or high water, it must not go forward. Now, the GCOM, I would like to get the GCOM commissioners, Brother Sprutman and Brother Alexander, to come and talk about what is happening in GCOM. But what are your concerns in relation to the firing of the CEO and so on, and the steps to rehire persons to fill those positions.
Well, I mean, I want to point to the WPA statement, which WPA did put out a statement on the matter, which we support the position taken by, the opposition commissioners. This is basically that given the state of GCOM, with the known political atmosphere in the place, and the lack of confidence among commissioners and among citizens in the country as it relates to GCOM and GCOM business, that since those two positions, the chief election officer position and the deputy chief election officers, are important positions in the electoral machinery of GCOM and the country, and given this, the manner in which they were removed, it is only proper that they are replaced by a process that is extremely transparent, and it doesn't involve the GCOM commissioners, who the PPP commissioners had made it very clear in GCOM and to the nation that they wanted the head of those persons, and they got the head. There was the judge and the jury. Okay?
Supported by the chair.
And supported by the chair. Now, the way things are being done in GCOM is that for that particular post, the GCOM commissioners could make the decision. And apparently they have been making a decision historically. And the PPP is insisting that constitutionally they have the right to make to participate in making the decision, and they're holding very strong on that right. Whereas the opposition commissioners are saying, in light of everything else, there should be a transparent process where some person or persons of high standing and good reputation in the community should be responsible to participate and to engage in the selection process. The PPP will have none of that, and I think and the WPA supports the transparency process. We believe it will give more confidence across the country, to whoever eventually emerge to replace the two fired officers. And that will be good for GCOM, good for the country, and good for electoral transparency as a whole. So we are very concerned that the PPP attitude on this matter, and it seems to have the support of the chair, there haven't been a vote on it. That's why I say seems, because there haven't been a vote on it, so she haven't pushed it one way or the other. But it seems like the way in which their PPP is approaching the matter, they seems to feel that they will prevail.
So the four commissioners of GCOM, four of them, not all commissioners, but the four. I don't want to get myself in trouble. The four commissioners of GCOM, the four representatives of the PPP and GCOM.
3 plus the chair.
Oh, okay. I know.
It's 3 plus the chair.
Oh,
she's not a commissioner. She's in a special category.
But I wasn't talking about the chair.
So who's the fourth one, boy?
Got to be somebody.
Anyway.
It's got to be somebody. Anyhow, so it's 4-3. Yeah. And all decisions favorable to the PPP and unfavorable to the opposition if it does continue along that line, are going to be falling in line with the march of the PPP if there is not an independent input into the decision making.
And even the PPP, they're not going to bend because they have constitutional backings. The constitution back them.
Okay.
And they're not the kind of political party who genuinely interested in transparent elections. They want to replace those people with PPP people.
Yeah, but they have
So they're not going. You're not going to get them bent. They're going to bend.
The history of GCOM was that.
Right?
The Gokul Budus, the what's it? The other chair. What was his name? I wouldn't align Suraj Bali so much, but before Suraj Bali, we had the other one that died at installed Janet Jagan. Do not sing, and so on. I mean, for years, Gokul was running rampant at the GCOM, and the evidence is clear that he did a lot of stuff, including denying the AFC of seats that were supposed to be allocated to them and so on.
Linden seat.
Yeah, so they have been accustomed to that, and the change for them was a blow, right? When actually it was Steve, under this Steve Suraj Bali's stewardship, that we had a change in terms of the CEO of GCOM and the deputy CEO and so on. And for them, that was something totally disastrous for them. So they are basically trying to get the system back to what they had it, the way they had it configured, so that the decisions could always be in their favor, that seats could be allocated to them that didn't belong to them and so on. But people don't talk about these things. They're making it appear as though rigging began in 2015, you see, and that is it. That is because nobody seems to talk about these things, and the PPP continues to push this narrative that, even on social media, every time somebody raises an argument, the supporters, why you don't tell them about the rigging, what happened at GCOM in 2015, and they don't seem to have a sense of what transpired before,
And even if one, for the sake of the discussion, put aside for the moment what happened before 2020, that is why I'm so hard on CARICOM, because for CARICOM to agree on tabulation and verification, and only do tabulation, let's give back to the PPP all the votes that they allege was stolen, and verification with the APMU, and the APMU supporters felt would have given back them votes that the PP steal from them, they didn't get. You set up a very dangerous precedence that feed into the PP historic narrative that rigging is only done on the other side, and somehow the PP is clean and never engaged in electoral rigging. You see? But if if the CARICOM process did verification, it would have been harder for the PPP people to behave the way they're behaving, So CARICOM, in a way, in trying to fix Guyana as they probably thought they were trying to do.
They weren't trying to fix Guyana. They were going according to the dictates of the likes of the ambassador who was carrying out the dictates of the Republican Party. The OAS and all of them. So they weren't coming to fix anything.
But to the extent they might think that whatever they're doing was in some way helpful to Guyana, I think it proved to be otherwise. In a multi-ethnic society where race and elections, as an election rigging has evolved the way which has evolved in Guyana, you have to be very careful how you're dealing with that particular business. Because if you only demonize one side, then what you're in fact doing is supporting the rigging on the other side. So on that score, you have to you got to be very balanced and call a spade, and let the chips come down wherever it has to come down. But that didn't happen in 2020 general elections and the recount process. You see?
So that is another struggle that we have on our hands.
And
Because if we're talking about having, because they're saying that they want a GCOM that is clean and lean.
But who determined that?
Well, that's the point.
Who determined it?
What does clean and lean and so on mean in the context of the whole country, not in their context? So you're configuring the agency to suit your purpose. I mean, it had been doing that for over 2 decades. There was a short period when that was broken, but you want to revert to that which was in existence, and you're arguing that you have a right to do that, and so continue the process of excluding an entire section of this society from participating in the free and fair process of elections. And that is another struggle that we have. So the IRI, they're talking about election reform. Nandalal and all of them are touting election reform. How do you see this movement for reform taking place? We only have a few minutes, but
I think because that's a special discussion for a program is more substantive.
Yeah.
But I think that there is no doubt that the country needs electoral reform. I mean, I think generally anybody looking at Guyana's electoral architecture would be hard pressed to see that the country doesn't need reform. But what kind of reform, what direction, and how do we arrive at the consensus, on these reforms, which is the challenge. Because in this country, we're not a nation. We're more than one nation, that got, their own particular interests and see the country and the world through their own lens. And we don't have a sufficient enough cement, and cohesion on these sensitive issues to act as a whole. So it's going to be a challenging situation. You see, you remember historically our electoral process was the dictates of the colonial masters, the British, and so on, so. They basically structured the colonial system with the influence of the Americans and so. And then when we get independence, the PNC and Burnham and so fashion the process, the way they see it. When the PP come to power in '92, they begin to refashion the process, to suit their own needs. And the APMU wasn't in power long enough. APMU, AFC wasn't in power long enough to really fashion anything. But the point I'm making is that as a nation on these sensitive issues, we don't act in oneness. We're coming from different positions and different interests, and it will take some time before we arrive at some workable compromise or consensus that could deliver us effective and useful reforms to the country. And I don't think we are at that position at present in the country.
Well, let's hope that, somehow, by some means, we were able to get there, and that the will, for independence in GCOM actually be established. The current configuration leaves us in a bind because favorable or unfavorable decisions are basically one track to suit the design of one agent. And unless we have an independent mind at the head that can say, well, okay, for all that it's worth, I'm going to cast my vote in this direction or that direction. We are basically in a bind all the time.
Well, just as I said, this needs a special program.
Yeah.
But persons who have studied the chairman behavior felt she was under significant pressure from the Republican government, you know, the Trump administration. Now there's change in the U.S. administration. Hopefully she'll be under less pressure, and we may see some more semblance of fair play and independence. But that is something you can't hope for. You have to fight for and struggle for, and put pressure both on the Americans and you know, the diplomatic community, general international community, United Nations, and so, you know, for some level of fair play in Guyana. But we got to deal with that matter probably at a more substantive program.
Well, it's to the people out there, I want to thank you again for being part of the viewership of Walter Rodney Groundings, and I want to thank Brother Ogun for coming here this evening and enlightening us in this discourse on things that are happening in our society. And remember that we have to be vigilant. We cannot allow the excesses of the administration to continue, whether by means of the police force or whether through GCOM or any other agency. But we have to be prepared to resist any attempts at total domination and dictatorial tendencies. And I hope that Brother Ogun always uses COVID, but at some point we have to move beyond COVID and begin to take the matters to the level where there will be an understanding that enough is enough. Do have a good night. See you next week. Same time, same channel, when we'll have another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. Good night.